This is the Cycling Over 60 podcast, Season 3, Episode 27, Revel Revolution Ride. And I'm your host, Tom Butler. I have decided to change the time for the Cycling Over 60 Zwift ride. So now instead of Zwift Thursday, we'll have Zwift Tuesday. I'm also moving the time to 4:30 p.m. Pacific time and reducing the distance to 12.5 miles. If you ride Zwift, consider joining the Cycling Over 60 Zwift Club and joining me for Zwift Tuesday. Also, whether you're riding or not, jump in for the Zoom chat that will happen at the same time. I would love to meet you via Zoom. Send me an email for the Zoom link. You can find my email in the show notes. I'll also put the Zoom call ID and password in a Cycling Over 60 Strava post. Unfortunately, they don't allow links there. We did our first bike trip on the Olympic Discovery Trail last weekend, and it was awesome. We really liked the funky place where we stayed. If you like to have a little more adventurous campsite, check out the Soul Duck Rainforest Retreat. We stayed in a tent provided by the, quote retreat. It was an awesome tent. There was an air mattress provided, but Kelly and I are wimps, so we brought an extra cushion to put on top of the air mattress. And that made our bed very comfortable. There was a cot in the tent, which would have made it very easy to fit 3 people. We ended up having McKenna and Garen stay one of the nights. That made it a little tight, but it still worked. The tent cost us $70 a night for the 2 of us. There was an extra charge for additional guests. At the campground, there are spaces to bring your own tent if you like. I think the tent sites are like $46 a night. We had electricity in the tent, and the host provided a heater. Now, the heater only put out a little heat, which I think was good since it was in a tent. The heater took just enough of an edge off from a night that was pretty cold. We did need some heavy blankets to be warm, and Kelly should have worn heavier sleeping clothes the first night. The only downside to the retreat were the bathrooms. Everything there was a little run down, but it was very functional. However, one of the toilets got really dirty, and it wasn't cleaned while we were there. That still left 2 other toilets, and we never had to wait to use them. There were also good showers, but again, the place was a little rustic. We were in campsite number 2, and it was right next to the Olympic Discovery Trail. Some of the sites were down a short, steep hill, but it was easy to ride our bikes from our site to the trail. We rode 10 miles on the Olympic Discovery Trail to Spruce Railroad Trailhead and turned around there. The return trip was a consistent 2 to 3% grade, but nothing too challenging. It was typical rail-to-trail grade. From the Spruce Railroad Trailhead, we could have continued on another 24 miles to Port Angeles, but we were looking for an easy trip. The trail runs alongside Crescent Lake, which is beautiful. However, for most of the ride, the trail is quite elevated above the lake. But the view of the lake through the trees was wonderful. I think a fantastic trip would be to start in Port Angeles and ride to the Soul Duck Rainforest Resort. That would be 34 miles one way. Then spend the night in one of the tents and ride back the next day. You wouldn't need to carry a tent or a mattress and possibly not a stove. There are a couple of areas at the campground that are shared kitchen spaces. However, we didn't use them, so I would confirm the stoves work if you want to use that option. And there is a fire pit, so that is an option for cooking. We booked our tent through Airbnb, and it was easy communicating with the host Logan. Another option would be to make a longer trip out of it. It's a 53-mile ride from Port Townsend to Port Angeles, and then 35 miles from Port Angeles to the campground. That would make for a really cool 4-day trip. To turn it into a 3-day trip, it would be possible to ride the 87 miles from the campground to Port Townsend in one day, but it is 4,500 feet of climbing. The final option that I would consider is starting in Sequim, Washington. There are plenty of nice camping options in Sequim on the Salish Sea. Starting in Sequim would give a 52-mile ride to the Soul Duck Rainforest Retreat with 2,789 feet of climbing. The return trip would be 1,800 feet of elevation. A word of warning, just east of Port Angeles is a section of the Olympic Discovery Trail that is very steep with a narrow, sharp turn. This part of the trail is definitely not part of an abandoned railroad. I truly believe that this is a trip worth traveling to do. The Olympic Peninsula is really beautiful. There really isn't an easy way to get to the area without a car. Sadly, it isn't an option to take a ferry from Seattle to Port Angeles. If that was possible, then you could fly with your bike to SeaTac Airport, assemble it there, and then you could take your bike on the light rail and get off close to the ferry terminal. To get to the Port Angeles area, it is either a multi-day bike ride or a car trip. One idea I thought about was to ship a bike. Bikeflights.com quoted $120.21 to ship a bike. I randomly put in Chicago to Sequim just to see the cost. So obviously that cost would change for other areas. The quote included a $34 charge for insurance. It would take a week for the bike to get from Chicago to Sequim with regular ground shipping. Second day air would cost $258 compared to the $84 charge for ground. A cardboard Bike Flights box that would fit my Specialized Roubaix would cost $90. Currently, the website says they're all sold out of that size. Someone online recommended going into a local bike shop and seeing if they have any bike boxes that they would be willing to give for free. The Bike Flights box advantage is that it comes with everything needed to secure the bike inside the box. Getting a box from a bike shop probably means figuring that out yourself. I chose Sequim as a destination because I'm familiar with a great bike shop in Sequim called Ben's Bikes. I called, and they use Bike Flights a lot. They would receive a bike shipped there and assemble it for $80. I didn't ask what they would charge just to receive a bike without assembly. I do think it is easy to drop off a boxed bike at any UPS location, and Bike Flights have really good instructions on how to box it up. And picking up at UPS might be just as easy. But of course, then you would have to do your own assembly. One thing the person said that I talked to at Ben's Bikes is it kind of depends on how much is required to tune the bike up after shipping. My hope would be that not much. I think what Bike Flights provides for securing your bikes would mean that there wouldn't be much tweaked in the process. I did look at Ben's Bikes options for rentals. While I don't like their option for road bikes, if you would like, they do rent e-bikes. The e-bike example they provided was a Trek Alliant Plus 7. That is a $75 a day rental. I'd want to check about keeping it overnight before relying on that as an option. Ben's also has a Cat Trike electric recumbent trike for rent, and that's 2 days for $175. I would find that kind of fun to try out. Again, I think this is an amazing area of the country, and I would recommend anyone considering a trip out to explore it by bike. And if you're part of the Olympic Peninsula Visitor Bureau, you're welcome for the free promotion. One final note before we get to the interview this week. Since the Foothills Trail Bridge was demolished that connects the plateau I live on to the valley, I have been mostly riding on the plateau. That means not too many hills. While I typically look to ride down to the valley in the south, last week I decided to head north. The Green River Valley is on that side of the plateau. I was exploring what I hope to be part of a 100-mile loop when the Foothills Trail Bridge gets repaired this summer. I found a route that I'm really excited about as a training ride for Seattle to Portland this year. I'm looking to ride a 40-mile section. That route includes 1,600 feet of climbing, and that climbing is mostly on 2 hills. Each hill keeps me right on the edge of my climbing ability, so it's a real challenge for me. I think it is perfect to build my climbing capacity. The only problem with the route is that there are a couple sections that aren't very good because of traffic. However, I think they'll be fine for an early Sunday morning ride and maybe even mid-morning when people are at work. I'm confident if I keep pushing myself on these rides, I'll be set up for a great STP. I talk a lot about Cascade Bicycle Club because I think they are an example of what it looks like when you get a significant number of people supporting cycling in an area. I do like it when I get to talk to leaders from the club. And this week, I'm pleased to interview one of their board members, Gina Kavesh. As you will hear, Gina is a special force in cycling in the Pacific Northwest. Here's our discussion. I love it that the podcast gives me the opportunity to talk to really interesting people. And this week, I get to introduce you to one of them. Thank you, Gina Kavesh, for coming on board.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, you're a board member at Cascade Bicycle Club and have been described as a matriarch of the local women's cycling scene. And I feel fortunate to have you share your thoughts with us today.
I'm matriarch, I guess, better than grandma, but I think I'm technically the grandma now, or maybe great grandma.
Well, that's good. Nothing wrong with being a grandma.
Yeah.
So what are your earliest memories of the bicycle?
I think I'm common to everybody who rides a bike in these days as a kid. that somewhere in elementary school I figured out how to get the training wheels off, and it gave me the advantage to go ride my bike to school every so often. But I remember going up and down the streets. I've lived on the east side, Bellevue, Newport Hills, and during Seafair, you'd put the hydroplane behind your bike and you'd go racing down the street with your kid friends and see whose hydro would win. So it's the precursor to the boat races at Mariner Games or whatever. So
Yeah,
yeah, lots of just riding the neighborhood with no helmet on bikes that probably weren't fit well, and we all survived. A few scrapes and bruises.
right. At some point, you started competing and you got into bicycle racing. What sparked that transition?
Yeah, that was an odd one. I actually gave up riding. I mean, or I didn't ride much, into college, and I moved to the Bay Area right after college, and a friend invited me to go up to wine country and do a bike ride with her. I had the traditional build it yourself department store bike that somehow I ended up with and moved with. And we did a 10-mile ride in the Bay Area up in Napa Valley when you could ride a bike and not get killed. And I was like, this is great. I need a real bike because she had a real racing bike and I had junk. So I went and bought a bike, and then I started riding in the Bay Area. Then I moved back here, and at that point I'd fallen in love with riding. So I started to ride, and I found Cascade, found a group of people to ride with, started doing all the events, and along the way met a gal. My group of folks were doing at the time, I think it was the Daffodil Classic. I don't even know if it still happens. And we found this gal who'd been dropped by the guy she was riding with. She is still one of my closest friends. And she was an ex-rower, and she decided she wanted to check out what this bike race thing was. She said, "You got to come." And I'm like, "Okay." And she found us a bike team, and she excelled. I did not excel immediately, but I am one stubborn person. So once I got hooked, I just kept going. She got away from road riding now. She's done all sorts of sports, but she's back into mountain biking and downhilling, which at age 60 plus 65 or 70 doing downhilling is pretty learning that sport at that age is impressive.
Yeah, that's impressive to me. I feel a bit intimidated by
Mhm.
gravity on a mountain bike and sharp dirt turns and everything. So yeah, I'm impressed by that for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So I got into it and I just kind of kept poking at it, and eventually I got decent at it, or I should say I got pretty good at it. And I've just loved it ever since. Obviously, you have a trajectory when you race that you're kind of all in, and then over time as age catches up, you start to get a little bit more out. So I still compete, but not nearly as much as I used to, and mostly just focus on time trials, primarily because you can do age category for women. There aren't enough women in the sport per se. So, if I want to go do a bike race, I have to race against a lot of people who were me when I was starting. And, 20 or 30 years difference in age makes a big difference on the field. Men, there's enough men so they can offer master categories. In bike racing, old people are masters, unlike golf where seniors are master or seniors are old.
Right, gotcha.
So yeah, so it's just, it became a passion, it became a lifestyle. I met my husband through bike riding and bike racing. And the people who took me under their wing, who helped me get good, all were giving back to the sport. And so that was innately inherent in like, if you're going to help me, I want to play it forward.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and so you found a team,
mhm.
and it seems like that's a pretty instrumental step.
Yeah, whether you want to call it a team, a community, a group of people that is supportive, a group of people that help nurture you, that can pick you up when you don't have a great day, show you the tricks, because there's no manual, right? I mean, there is a quote unquote a rule book, but that doesn't tell you how to ride a bike and doesn't tell you some of the etiquette. And so, yeah, finding a group of people, and my first group was a Cascade group who taught me some of those. And I mean, I know you've been doing this a bit. The name Jerry Baker may have popped up. Jerry Baker of the
Yeah,
Velodrome.
yeah.
Jerry Baker's brother, Tom, the Baker brothers were one of the first riders in the area back in the 60s and 70s. Um, and Tom taught me how to pace line, how to understand what bike racing was. And those were the people I started riding with in a Cascade thing. And then, you just progress.
How would you describe like the time when you started racing as far as embracing women in competitive endeavors, athletic endeavors?
Well, I started racing in 93, 94, 92, 93. cycling's always been inclusive of women. You weren't ever felt like second class, but there just weren't enough women out there. And so for people who are putting on events, if you're going to only have 15 women show up, there's one race, right? So it was hard because there wasn't enough diversity in the skill set so that when I started showing up, I was racing against people who were racing at a national level. So if you're a beginner and you're racing against that caliber rider, you don't do so well. You have to be really, really mentally okay with having your butt handed to you weekend after weekend. Over the years, I mean, we had the Lance influx, like what Lance did to the landscape. And then we also had some people, the Seattle community started to grow. The bike racing thing really started to grow again because of the Lance effect. And we, at a certain time, we had women's fields that actually sold out. Like a max women's field for a beginner was 50 women, and we had to have like an event had two because there were 75 women racing. And at my categories, you'd suddenly have 50 or 60 women. So, it went way up. Unfortunately, it's kind of gone back down. In the competitive world, in the non-competitive, or in just the cycling in general, I think it's been 50-50. I think the statistics show 50% of people who ride a bike identify as female, or however you want to define that. It's just a different model on how you see that person and whether they feel ready or want to go do these structured events, and do they have a community to do that. And so like a bike team or a bike club, it's great, but you still want to find people that are supportive of you. And if it's all guys, sometimes guys work differently than women do work. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And so, it's really creating that sense that people feel like they get there and that they are not going to be dropped. They're not going to be lost. Um, Women, I think inherently, and maybe this is my bias just from my time working with women on the bikes, getting them involved, there's a little bit more, I don't think it's fear, but it's more, I want to know what I'm doing before I do it, right? Versus I'm just going to jump in and go for it. Now, I just jumped in and went for it. Bad. But there's a lot of women who are like, well, if I'm going to go do it, what happens if I have a flat? What happens if I have a mechanical? Am I going to be safe? I don't know where I'm going. How, all these things. So it's like, I want a little bit more structure before I get out there. And if I'm going to go with people to something, I want to know they're going to ride with me. But I don't want to hold them up. I don't want to be so slow that they're all frustrated. So, you're constantly juggling that.
Hey everyone, I'm briefly interrupting this episode to remind you that it is simple to have your opinion shape the Cycling Over 60 podcast. Look for a link at the top of the episode description that says send me a text message. When you tap the link, a text message box will open up and you can type something that will be sent directly to me. I look forward to reading all your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions for the show. Now back to the discussion. Now, when you're competing, it's something that takes discipline, no matter, what you're competing in. And I'm wondering if, how you look back and think about that. Did that dedication to cycling, competition, did that influence other areas of your life?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I look at cycling has kind of helped me evolve as a person as well as a manager. And it also was a good outlet for competitiveness in a positive way. I always say you always want to deal with me after I've had a bike ride than on a day where I'm supposed to, or like if I haven't had a couple bike rides, I'm not as good of a manager.
Gotcha.
A little fatigue's a little good.
Get some of that energy out.
Yeah. But it made me appreciate that, I think competitive sport or sport in general just brings something to everybody's life. I'm a huge advocate. I don't care what the sport is. I think having sport, you learn teamwork. You learn your own boundaries. You push through certain things that you never thought you would, but because your team's relying on you, you may. You learn how to deal with failure. You learn how to deal with success. You learn how to deal with the unanticipated. I mean, I just think it's such an important thing. And I didn't do a lot of sports as a child. I didn't really cycling is really the only sport I've ever done with any ability in any competition per se. And finding that in my mid 20s, late 20s was like this whole new thing. And then when you're in, like I said, if you're involved with a team or a club or a nonprofit like Cascade, none of us are paid. So how can you help mold something or move something when your only leverage is, I think this will work, let's try it, and respect each other when it doesn't work.
When you were growing up, do you think it was looked at differently as far as being a girl and competing?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I was in high school, well, I was in elementary, middle school, like when Title IX passed, what was that, 70 something? So I was in school, high school, we had we had girl sports, but you didn't get scholarships. Um, and so I would say that I'm kind of on the beginning of the edge of what now is so common for girls or women. Like women, when they are in high school or girls are in high school or whatever, competition and sport, that's part of who they are. Where I'm at was a cutting edge. Like for me to find this gal who got me into bike racing, she had been in sports her entire life. And she's 5, 7 years older than I am. And that was unusual, right? And if you just go back to my mom's generation, sport wasn't part of the female's vocabulary. I mean, for
Right.
numerous reasons. I mean, my mom and dad still, or my mom's passed, my dad still gets mad at me. He's like, "You only have so many heartbeats and you waste them on the bike."
Okay.
But I mean, and the other thing I say is that I'm a little ahead of the curve is so I've been doing this endurance sport for 35 years at
Hmm.
varying levels. A couple years ago, I had the great pleasure of finding out being diagnosed with AFib. Very common in endurance sports in men. Very, very common because for men who have been competing for 30 plus years, left atrium explodes. We get less elastic, and the heart's like, I can't control this anymore. I go into the cardiologist, they're like, yeah, we're starting to see some women, but it's still a small percent. I'm like, it's coming.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So, all got fixed and whatever, and it's amazing what surgery can do. But it was just interesting for when talking to the cardiologist, they're like, yeah, you have the classic left atrium that has been expanded over years from all your exercise. You're doing all the right things. It's just your nodes, your sinus nodes can't keep up with it because you're less elastic. They're like, we see this pretty common in men. I mean, you read about it, and comes all air quotes. I mean, it's not everybody's getting it. And he's like, we're just starting to see some women. He goes, but you've been doing it so long, it's not surprising. And we expect, again, there are women now racing. There are people racing or people who ride a bike that I knew when they were 12 and they're now in their 20s and 30s.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
the percentage says eventually women and men will probably have some equalness in some of these other things that happen when you're doing an endurance sport for forever.
Right. Have you, by any chance, watched the documentary Uphill Climb? It's talking about the first recognized Tour de France for women.
I haven't seen that one. I saw a documentary about sharing the road. That was a few years ago.
Okay. I just find it a fascinating story,
Hmm.
like how different it was for these women who basically had to make their way,
Yeah.
rather than having these really organized cycling teams. And I think it's just a great look at a group of people that want to do something or and are going to make it happen. And it was interesting because then after that first one, there might have been two of them. I can't remember, but
Yeah, there were like a handful and then it stopped for a lot of years.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, women's sports, women can't do the same distance. Women can't do this. Women can't do that. And again, there are differences. I have to say the Tour de France is cray cray for what they have the men do. But women's sports across all sports, the competition may look different, but it's still really good competition. I mean, I've loved WNBA and women's basketball for a long time more than men because it has to be a team sport.
yeah,
You don't have the showboating.
yeah. Well, shout out to the Storm.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And women's bike racing, because they're usually shorter races, can be really exciting because there's more tactics and they're going to race from the gun. I mean, if you watch a Tour de France stage, you're like, I'll come in the final hour because it's just a joke most of the rest of it. I mean, I shouldn't say a joke, but nothing interesting is happening. And then when they shorten some of those, in the Tour de France men's, they have some of those shorter stages now. That's exciting racing. And for the American population, sport needs to be exciting. Watching people pedal along in a big pack with nothing happening for hours is boring. Seeing attacks or seeing something dynamic happen is exciting.
Well, you bring up exciting, and I'd be interested if you have some thoughts on something that I found to be incredibly exciting, and that was the women's Olympic road race. I'm wondering if you could break that down a little bit. Kristen Faulkner winning that. I mean, that's just like a classic for all times, as far as I'm concerned. Can you break that down a little bit?
Well, I mean, the race itself had been good, and I have to admit that I was kind of tuning in, tuning out. But that final 10 kilometers was amazing, or with 15 kilometers. It's a I should say it's a classic tactic, but you have to be really strong. And the thing about bike racing, particularly the way that Kristen won, you have to be willing to lose because when she made that counterattack, I mean, when they were chasing, I'm like, damn, if they catch, who's gonna go? Does somebody have the legs to throw it to the wind and go for it? And if they do they have the power to hold?
Yeah.
Bless her. I mean, that was textbook. Like you've been chasing, you catch that group and you go. And you hope the person that's been in the front doesn't have the legs and the person you've been with doesn't have the legs. And then the three of them looked at each other like, you. I mean, and voila, she's off.
I mean, there's some elements there where like she has to go for it, right? I mean, she has to make that decision, and then there's no going back
Right.
once she decides to make that decision. And then it seems like, there's this element where the people that are with her have a moment of questioning whether or not they're going to follow her. And then, and kind of, okay, is this it or isn't it? Do we not need to chase her down or whatever? That
Yeah,
gets exploited.
I mean, so again, for Kristen to make that move, like I said, she made, and I don't know whether she thought about, again, sometimes when you're doing that, having done a race where that's like the tactic, having done that myself, it's like you know that you could not win,
Right.
right? Like you're
Right.
going to go for it. You're throwing caution to the wind,
Right.
lay it out there, and if you get caught, that was your bullet, as they say,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Right.
Um, Conversely, when you have a small group that someone does that, when you're at the end of a race like that, you're tired and you're like, someone else, could you close that? And I'll sit on your wheel and then I'll do it to
Right.
you. So
Right.
and it only takes a second. I mean, you
Yeah.
saw how fast
Yes.
she took off. They all
Yeah.
just, what, 30 seconds, 25 seconds?
Yeah.
And then they couldn't get themselves organized. And that's all
Yeah.
she needed. As well as
I,
she's super strong. I mean, she was on fire that
right.
day.
It was interesting for me because, I'd seen Chloe Dygert crash in the time trial,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, oh, that just hurt. And then when she crashed again in the road race, it's just like a gut punch, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, and then to watch the race in that way, I think all that kind of disappointment, just like, just watching that happen, and you're just like, go, and beat some fantastic people. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an awesome story.
And that's the other thing about bike racing. I mean, you have your favorites. I mean, we can think of the names in the men's sport and even in the women's sport that you have favorites, but on any given day, it can be any given person's
Yeah.
go, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, so you asked me about bike racing and stuff. I said I'm decent. I had some great wins. And a lot of times I never was lining up to win. I was there to do what I needed to do to try to get someone else to win. But on the right day, and when you do a bike race, even though you go in with strategy, you go in with team tactics, once you start rolling, all bets are off because everybody comes in with their own thing, and then you have some wild card. And on any given day, somebody can pull it off. And if
Right.
someone's willing to blow for it, right?
Right.
And that's when I go back and say what's so amazing about sport is things that you don't think you have in your body that you pull out. I mean, I can think of some events where I went for it and I didn't expect it to stick, and I may still not have won, but I still ended top three because the two people who caught me were able to drop me at the final point. But I'm like, I've just been on my own for 50 miles.
Right.
I didn't expect that to happen.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing more in that realm. And you, I think, do some coaching. Is that right?
I've done informal coaching.
Okay.
I am not a formal coach. I would say my claim to fame is I've done a lot of clinics focused on women. Myself and three other gals from up here for 5 years went down to the Bay Area, not the Bay Area, to Redlands, California, and did a women's only clinic with some gals down there. Um, and then I've done some clinics around town. I love helping someone learn how to ride a bike.
Tell me more about that. What's rewarding about that for you?
For me, again, it's more like passing along knowledge and helping someone with the little thing that just makes it a better experience. Because there's just so much to bike riding that there's just no way to understand. I mean, someone buys a bike, they may know how to shift, they may not understand how gears work. They may, it took me a while before someone explained gear inches. I was like, gear inches, what the heck? And I'm like, oh, now I understand. That's how the gears feel harder or stronger. There's an actual mathematical thing behind it. I mean, that's for my brain, but I needed someone to tell me, like, if I'm going to go uphill, don't be in that big ring. I also need someone to tell me don't wear underwear with my chamois.
Right.
you know, and so it's those little things, and it's so rewarding. And like I said, it also, when you can give someone that skill, if you teach someone to fish, right? When we did these clinics in California, we always spent a little bit of time on like how to change a flat tire. And
Hmm.
Cascade does these classes that are amazing because that's something that people are, they're like, well, what happens if I flat? And I'm like, well, you learn how to change a flat tire, and it's easier to do it while you're on the side of when standing here when you don't need to
Right.
than when you have to. And women, like I said, women particularly. I mean, I talk to women, they're like, "Oh, I can't go ride. I'd like to ride more, but my husband's working, or our hours don't line up, and we can only ride together." And I'm like, "Why is that?" "Well, what would I do if I flatted?" I'm like, "You could learn to fix it."
Right.
"Well, how do I take my wheel off?" I'm like, "Well, let's start with that. Let's start with how to take your rear wheel on and off." People seem to do the front wheel okay. The rear wheel scares them.
Yeah, I get
Um,
that.
yeah, so it's just rewarding because you see folks blossom
Hmm.
when you've done that, or you see them downstream, or, if we had a clinic, we saw where they started to where they ended. I mean, these clinics we would do, like the beginner group literally was how to clip in and how to clip out and not fall over. By the end of 2 days, they were doing that and they were doing a little pace line and they actually got on the road. The advanced riders were doing fancier stuff. And then, just over time, it's just like if you can give that in a way that isn't threatening. I just find it rewarding because people did that for me.
And I'm thinking that you must have seen uh, many times. Like there's an element of completion, right? Whether you've got, you know, finished first or finished, last or whatever. There's just that element of completion of that I think has such a big impact on us, on our brains, like I can do something.
Hmm.
And to have that kind of moment where that sinks in that I just finished that race, that's got to be really fun to see.
I agree. And I think the other thing, and this goes back to what you've learned and how it affects your life. I think every time you finish an event or a sporting competition, again, regardless of where you place, is what did you learn? Right? I mean, that
Right.
for when I was racing regularly, when we'd finish, my first questions to myself was like, what did I learn? Because I learned something in every race. And then when we were talking on our drive home, I'd ask, like, what did you learn today? And sometimes it was mundane, like, I do not like that flavor of blocks or whatever. But inevitably, it would be like, oh, I learned never underestimate the book. Like the book and the cover, you can have somebody, you're like, oh, that person can fly up a hill because they're so little, and that person's bigger and they're not going to fly up a hill, and then have my butt crushed by that bigger person going up the hill. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't assume.
I want to turn to your leadership role at Cascade Bicycle Club,
Okay.
and you're co-president of the board. And uh, how would you say that an organization like Cascade is vital for the cycling community here in the Pacific Northwest? What makes it vital, I guess?
Wow. What makes it vital is it's been here for as long as it's been. It has been instrumental in making Seattle one of the best places in the country to ride your bike. It is recognized across the country as a groundbreaking organization. And knowing some of the history and it started as all volunteers and that the free group rides. And like I said, I started with the free group rides, but there's so much work that Cascade does for the infrastructure and the safety and bringing better cycling, rolling, pedestrian infrastructure to us that we just don't see that is so critical because there are many places that don't have that sort of emphasis and they struggle. I've been in Colorado and there's places, Colorado Springs, Olympic headquarters, suck place to ride a road bike. Terrifying. One of the most amount of deaths and because then they don't have an organization like that. Somebody I know from time involved at the national level of cycling is in Park City, Utah, and they're trying to get something together, but it's really hard to get it off the ground and infrastructure. Cascade, when it got created, was a unique time in Seattle, and the fact that it still exists and has just gotten stronger and stronger, and it's part of who we are, cannot be understated how critical that is. And anybody who rides a bike in Seattle, I don't care how or why or where you're riding a bike. As I was saying the other day in a discussion, I'm like, we talk about bike community, and all of us have a subset of community. Like I'm one of those people in Lycra, and you may think that I'm a snob. And then I go by someone who's on an e-bike running their errands, and they're in a community that they may look at me like I'm not part of their community, but we're all on bike. We all need that infrastructure. And without Cascade, we don't have it. To me, it's just so critical, and we're so fortunate to have it. I mean, I know you're a newer bike rider-ish, but when I started riding back in Seattle, like on the south end of the lake, you go through the slough, right? And then you kind of go down and around and up to the bridge. You used to get to Bellevue Way and have to cross 4 lanes of traffic. Now, granted, in the 90s, Bellevue Way was a little less chaotic, but it was literally like you're looking, and go. So it's that sort of thing that people don't recognize how important, how lucky we have that.
You know, a lot of people listening this won't have a Cascade near them, and smaller club. Um, I'm wondering if Cascade Bicycle Club kind of sees a role for helping other clubs kind of learn how to develop across the nation. Is that something that you guys think about, kind of, having the resources that you have and being around as long as you have? Are you kind of thinking about that role?
Not necessarily at a national level because there's League of American Cyclists. So that's more of a national. Cascade right now is just focused on how do we help support not just the Puget Sound area, but how we do this across the state. One of the things that we hear in Cascade is like, you're just a Seattle organization. It's like, well, Cascade has Washington Bikes, which is a statewide organization really working on the ecosystem of safe cycling, of creating opportunity so that there are um, bike highways, if you would, that connect communities so people can do things in another way other than getting in their car. And that's really where the work has been, is how do we support what's happening in Spokane, in Yakima, in Wenatchee, in other smaller communities that have the need, but they don't have the resources. And then, at a national level, we certainly work with League of American Cyclists.
Well, I think that, like one of the things you guys model very well, for no matter what size of club you're in, is the element of collaboration. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the value that makes collaboration important.
Well, I think it goes back to like, okay, Cascade is the big club in the area, or is the big cycling organization. Cascade Washington Bikes is the big organization in the area. But just because we have more resources or a bigger organization doesn't say we know what your community needs. So you'd be foolish to go in with a great big, hammer and say, this is the way it's going to be. It's like we need to understand your community. And I would say Cascade's gotten better with that collaboration over the last 5, 6 years than previous. I'd say in some previous times, Cascade would come in with a great big stick and try to dictate. Obviously, that doesn't always work very well and doesn't help the community. And I would give a lot of credit now where we're at is Lee. Lee Lambert's doing a terrific job, and he is about collaboration. And he understands that, and the staff understands that we can do so much, but we really need to let people on the ground help them do what they knows best for their community. I mean, that's a lot of even, government and a lot of things is like, let's give the local community the resources so they can bring in what needs to happen.
Yeah. And I've seen that in action, like with Second Cycle in Tacoma, and collaborating with them. And I think that's wonderful. And again, I think it's one of those things that if you're a smaller club, then, collaborating gives you access to more resources,
Mhm.
and people working together can be more effective than, people working separately.
Oh,
So,
for sure. For sure. And again, it's a big state.
yeah. And in a pretty diverse state.
Yes.
And maybe every state has that, but it's a pretty diverse state. Now, Cascade Bicycle Club is introducing the Revel Revolution ride in June, and I'd like you to talk about that. What was the driving force behind this event?
Well, Lee and the team at Cascade have been talking about it for a little bit. There was a gap created in events back in the Wave ride was an all women's ride that the last year was 2018. It was really successful. It was a nonprofit called The Wave that was putting on this event, and it was a women's only ride. And I think the peak attendance was 1,200 women. And that ended in, like I said, 2018, 2019. And Lee and the team at Cascade have been looking and saying, we feel like there's a gap in the market. And again, as we've had an earlier conversation, what's it take to get women to events? And in this case, this event is women and non-binary. Like, how do you make a welcoming space for people who want to do some events, but they're intimidated? And I may be putting people, words in mouths. There's some people who just don't even know these things exist, but a woman only thing was something that's been on their mind. And so this was the year it was like, let's do it. Let's just, our expectations are not a huge number. It's not going to be 1,200 women. Be amazing, but it's not going to be 1,200 women. And let's start small. So it's, two routes. One is 26 miles, 27 miles around Lake Sammamish. The other's like 13 miles. Um, and let's start to build that community again, and bring that element in because when you get someone who does an event, that's the beginning of an event career, hopefully, that they start doing other events, but they also feel better about a bike.
I think there's a weird time right now, for me at least. I'm sorry if you don't agree with this position, anybody out there, but it is a time where there's like pressure to not be focused on diversity, not to be focused on equity or inclusion, which is really weird to me. But, you know, was that on your mind as you were talking about doing this ride at all? Like, this is introducing something that's focused on including people at a time where inclusion is like a bad word.
Well, the interesting thing is you can is this conversation was happening prior to some of the, if you would, the DEI initiatives being thrown out the window. Cascade is an inclusive organization, and they look at their numbers at events, and the event that comes closest to a 50-50 ratio with enough women is the wine ride, which says something we like to drink. Uh, um, but most of their rides are 20 to 25% female at best. And so one of the questions is like, who are we missing and how do we market to them and how do we get people out there? I mean, there's some free rides that have great women participation, but they don't want to do an organized ride. And again, not everyone's going to do an organized ride. And so the discussion was more like, how do we open up space to try to get people into the ecosystem of doing events and the ecosystem of Cascade, right? So Cascade has free rides, they have paid events, and then you just have the ecosystem of Cascade and Washington Bikes, which is supporting cycling as a community thing. And events and free rides are kind of, that's the feeder into the community of what Cascade is. And so if we don't have women showing up, we're missing people. And so is really intended on like how do we create something that we can invite those people in that's going to feel safer or more comfortable. Now, to your point, and I'm going to lean right into it because I was involved with the Wave Ride. We will get pushback, or some people are going to say, well, wait a second, you're calling for inclusion, but you're excluding men. Right? I mean, that's kind of the weird thing. Like you have a woman only event, whatever it is, and you get someone pushing back saying, well, that's exclusionary. It's like, okay, fair. What we are saying is we are asking are not invited to ride the ride, but we want men involved in the ride, to be an ally, to be a
Nice.
volunteer, to be involved. Now, way back at the beginning of this, we talked about how and so one of my first events I ever did was in the Bay Area, right after I got my new bike after my wine ride.
What did you get,
Um,
by the way?
what did I buy? I bought a Bridgestone touring
Okay.
bike.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
had that for 4 years. I loved that bike. So the first event, I met somebody who rode, and she got me to do my first metric century called the Cinderella Classic, which is in the Bay Area. It's still going on, women only, and all supported by men. And it was I mean, that was my first paid experience. I'm like, this is great. And there are some other women only events that have been going on. There's Little Red that happens in Utah. And, it's like, let's just do it. And again, men are certainly invited. At this particular event, we ask you not to ride. We ask you to help. And so,
And what a fantastic way to show support, to show up and help, to show up and serve and be there. I think that's great. It is an interesting thing. I find it, you know, as a man, to say, wow, this is unfair that I can't participate in this ride. It seems silly to me, but I know that, it feels to me like no one would seriously say that. But I think that, you know, go ahead, go ahead.
well, I'm going to say so. People will say it. I think one of the best example I have when we were doing the wave ride and my second year as the executive director, I got an email from a lady who had done the ride. And we had ambassadors out on the ride to help with mechanical stuff. Those were men. So there were a half dozen guys out there helping with mechanical stuff. And two people I had recruited, great guys that I ride with, were out there. And this lady wrote me a note. She goes, I don't know where you found this guy and this guy. What an antithesis of every guy I've ever ridden with. They were not assholes. They were great. They helped me with my flat. They got me on the road. Then they came and found me again to make sure I was okay. I really appreciate it. It makes a whole new perspective of what I think of men on the road. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, that is a wow. I mean,
Uh-huh.
like, she's like, oh, people like this exist?
hmm So you don't know what her experience was before.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, so I was like, okay, so unfortunately, yeah, there's some, I mean, you know, as I make the joke regularly because, you're a bike rider and someone's like, oh, you bike riders, you're always in the way and you're being an asshole on a bike. I'm like, you can be an asshole on a bike or you can be an asshole in a car. You're just an asshole.
yeah, yeah. Well said. Yeah. So, I think that for me as a man, there's things that I don't know, sometimes that I'm doing, maybe the way that I take up space or the way that I look at someone who's struggling or whatever. I think there's just some things that maybe I'm just not aware of that I need to be more aware of.
I think all of us have that blind spot, and cycling's a hard sport and everybody learns it and gains it at a different space and everybody gets something different out of it. And when you're starting in the sport, you don't know what you don't know, and you just are trying to do whatever you can to hang on or to ride and have a good time. And I can think of it. It happens regularly. I'll be riding, doing intervals or something, and someone jumps on my wheel, typically a guy, and then has to be there while I'm doing my interval. And then as I'm sitting up, they go blowing by and they do the head shake. And, like, is she chasing me? Is she chasing me? I'm like, I just finished an interval, you douche. I'm now resting and I'm going to turn around and go do another one. But you're a douchebag. Uh, and I've had it with both genders or all genders, where and I know I've done it too. Like you're riding, I'm like, oh God, I gotta pass this person. Oh, this is gonna turn into I do not want to do this. I don't want to go back and forth, back and forth. But they're riding a little slower than I want to go, and I'm gonna pass them. And I'm like, this is not a competition. I'm just going my speed. And if
Yeah.
you're gonna then surge around me, great. But then please keep going that speed because I don't want to do this game.
So my what I would say as a guy is that if a woman, if you're at an event or you ride with a woman or you're part of a club ride or whatever, and a woman says, "Hey, when you do this, it makes me feel uncomfortable." Like honor that.
Mhm.
Don't get defensive about it. It might be a blind spot that you have, and just honor it and sit with it and say, "Is there something I can be doing?" Just respect that, that feedback.
Well, and also respect that there is an innate built difference in our strength, right? I mean, really strong women are going to hang with strong men, but they're not going to be hanging with Tade, most
Yeah.
likely.
Yeah.
And if someone and again, I'd say this for all genders, like if you're riding with people and someone is struggling, you can look and say, are they in the right gear? I mean, sometimes you can look down, you're like, can I give you a hint? That combination's gonna suck on this hill. Go smaller. All of us have gears, use them. They're there for a reason. You don't need to stay in one. It's one of my favorite things. I'm like, you have 11 of them, use them.
Although I would say it as a guy, I think it takes a relationship first with women to really start like explaining everything. I think mansplaining is like a real deal. And
It
so
can
it's
be.
like
It can be.
like when you say, can I give you a suggestion? You might want to build a relationship with someone first before deciding that you need to change everything about what they're doing
Well,
because
and again, you have to use it tactfully, right? I mean, so
yeah.
if you're again,
Yes.
but that's why I say when you're riding, even regardless of who you're riding with, you get, hopefully you're getting to know them a bit, and you want to bring down your defenses so that they don't feel defensive. And one of the things that happens for women riding with men is they're worried that they're slowing the guy down. Like, oh, I'm slowing you down. I don't want to hold you up. I don't want to hold you up. It's like, the thing is, if I would hope if you're riding with somebody, again, whomever, and they're a little bit slower, you're going to take your pace down because you don't need to put them in the floor. I mean, maybe in a bike race, but just doing a ride, no. And that's what I tell people. Like if I invite someone out as to go for a bike ride, and someone's like, "Oh, I'm too slow. I'm going to slow you down." I'm like, if I say let's go for a bike ride, I want to ride with you. I
Yeah.
don't. Nothing else matters. If I have a workout, I'm not inviting you. I'm like, you don't want to come with me.
Well, that's, I'm sensitive to that because I'm slow. And, and so people do invite me to go for rides and I'm like, okay, are you sure you want to go that slow on your ride? And yeah, so it is a dynamic, but I think what you said there is if someone is saying, hey, you want to ride together, it's mostly just about hanging out together and the cycling is just a way to do that.
hmm It's a way to catch up. It's a way to talk. I mean, it's a very social sport when you're doing it in a group. And we have to meet people where they are.
Obviously there'll be a section of the Cascade Bicycle Club website that talks about the Revel Ride. Are there some key things that you would like people to know who are maybe considering doing it?
Come do it. Come experience it. Again, it's the beginning. It will become, This year, it's like I said, just two routes. Ultimately, I'm sure we'll build upon it and we'll get to a point similar to where the wave was with like four routes, where there'll be longer routes for people who are a little bit are ready for that. But come out and support the community. Come out and support the other female riders, the non-binary riders. The short route is great for people who are just really starting their cycling journey or are really unsure about what this event thing is. Come out, give it a try. The experience alone and being around that many people supportive, you're going to find a new love for the bike. So yeah, I mean, just register and show up.
I
And
love it.
it should be good weather. In June, but it should be good weather.
Yeah, yeah. We got a good chance.
Yeah.
So, well, I want to talk a little bit about you're on the board of directors, and there's an executive team, and Lee is leads the executive team. What are the differences that you look at as a board when you're looking at the future of Cascade Bicycle Club versus what the executive leadership does?
It's this is always the how you define what a board does. Really, board is governance and fiduciary duty. I mean, those are all technical terms. Our role is to be advisors and to be a sounding board and to support Lee and team in what they're seeing. They're the tactical players, but decisions or things that are broader on like how are we going to deal with like how do we best manage our money, right? Lee has Lee brings it to us and he's lays out his path on what he's looking at. He and his team lay it out, and then we'll ask questions, and we have a very diverse skill set. So somebody who has a lot of financial background may say, well, what about X, Y, or Z? Or we explored Y. If there's something that's maybe a change to a policy, something we dig into as well. Like we're going to make a policy change. And since we have a broad base of perspective on the board, including ride leaders, people who've done events, people who have great financial or marketing or interesting backgrounds, we can kind of look at it and say, okay, what's the membership going to think about this? How this is going to be responding to, or where are the blind spots that maybe the organization isn't seeing? That's really our role, is saying, let's just have a broader view, because when you're in the day in and day out nuts and bolts of bike advocacy and events and getting kids on bikes and these classes and all this other stuff, you may not see that blind spot. I mean, going back to the ride, when Lee brought it up, I was like, hey, Lee, I love it. Obviously, I was involved with it. I said, but the whole thing about men, I said, just be prepared. There's going to be a little bit of pushback. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah. So it's that sort of thing. So it's really it's a little higher level.
I'm wondering from that seed of kind of a higher level picture, how optimistic are you for cycling in general, the future of cycling, the future of safe cycling paths and things like that? What are your thoughts about the future as again, look at it from a broader vision?
I'm optimistic. I am optimistic, particularly in Washington State, that we will see more infrastructure and we will see better connections. It's a great way to move around, but it also brings the safer we can make it, or the way we can make these connections, it also helps bring up some of the pieces that we have where we screwed up in equity, right? I mean, bringing safer routes for the person who has to ride a bike to get to work is critical. We need to do that. Making it safer for people to get on and off transit with a bike, because a bike is a low cost, can be, I should say, way to travel. And so we need to look at how do we improve the guts? How do we make it safer? How do we make it so it's more approachable? Seattle, there's going to be things we can't get rid of. We can't get rid of hills. I think the e-bike has been, as much as I'm not going to ride an e-bike anytime soon, although I may get old enough, I will. I think an e-bike is an amazing thing, particularly for urban living. Like hopping on a bike, running the grocery store, boom, 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 terrific. e-bikes are that final mile e-bikes for getting to work. Like, I think it's a game changer. And that's why I get really optimistic because people are seeing it's a game changer and people are going to them and using them for sport, for commute, for work, for all these purposes. And the more people who ride bikes, the more we're going to see infrastructure following because there are people out there that will want it. Um, and so, yeah, so I'm hopeful. It's hard though, right? I mean, people are like, roads are a mess. Roads need work. We have bridges that are failing. I mean, and there's only so much money. It's hard to navigate, but at the same time, all this programming we're doing in schools and all these bikes that are doing this great work through the Let's Move program from the state, we're putting a lot of people on bikes. And the more people on bikes, I would say I'd much rather have I want as many people to ride a bike and experience the bike from the road or from the dirt like I do. And I recognize that, I mean, I'm a driver because the moment you start to ride a bike, you become a better driver being more aware of the bike. And you're probably a little bit more in tune with why some of this infrastructure work that we want to see happen, why some of the South Seattle work needs to happen, why, some of these connections from Burien and Rainier Valley need to come together. So we all have a safe way to move around, maybe take a car or two off the road, and support the rising of people being able to get to where they need to do their job, to do their grocery shopping, or just to be. And for kids to move around. I mean, kids on bikes is a great thing.
A lot of times when I ask people, because I ask almost everybody that comes on, what are your first memories of the bike? And, kids being able to experience like the bike as a tool for freedom,
hmm
I think that's super valuable.
It is. And when our age growing up, once I was able to ride a bike, my parents would let me, I was in Newport Hills. I could ride to the grocery store, I'd put my kickstand down, I'd go to the grocery store, do my thing, and ride home, and I'd ride to my friend's house. It was how I moved in my sphere, right? In the 5 miles around my house without my parents having to take me everywhere. Right now, there's a lot of places in this city, in our communities, in this state, where a parent's not going to let their kid ride even down the block because they're worried about it. I mean, and that's not just, I mean, that's, it's like, okay, we got to do better.
Now, do you think there's some value in studying places like Montreal or Paris? And, like what are the things that happened to create what seems like in Paris a pretty dramatic shift to active transportation?
I think it is worth exploring to understand what that cultural change was. I mean, you mentioned Paris. What's interesting is last spring, I went to New York for the New York Grand Fondo. And the day before, one person I met there and the two people that were working the event with me, they took us for a ride through New York into Central Park. I felt perfectly safe riding my road bike until I got to Central Park, which was no car day and then was really chaotic.
Okay. Okay.
But riding through Manhattan, riding through Harlem, riding across the George Washington Bridge, I was like, this is almost better than Seattle because it was fully connected. It had separated bike lanes and cars. I mean, cars don't move very fast in Manhattan, anyways. But, it felt really comfortable, air quotes, better than days where I'm riding Lake Washington Boulevard, and even though bikes have the right of way, I got cars going by me and they're going fast. So, so I think it is worth exploring and understand some of it is also just, um, I think some of our challenge here in Washington is we've never, we have some urban areas, but we have a lot of suburban areas. And because of our sprawl, we lose fact that the suburban and urban have to connect. And that's where, in a lot of these communities, Paris, New York, Toronto, their urban areas are so dense that nobody wants to drive.
Right. Right.
And we're not there yet. Although I
Mm-mm.
think we're getting there pretty close. I've been on I-5 lately and I don't want to drive it.
Yeah, that's right. It is relative, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, this is slow.
yeah. So it's a cultural shift. And and I'm hopeful we're going to get there. I
And I'm
think we have,
hoping that Washington can be a unique example. You know, we don't have, like the massive, of a New York City. It's not that size, but I'd love it to think that we can be an example to the world of embracing cycling, and embracing active transportation,
Hmm.
which for me, the biggest thing is that we need to find more reasons to be active.
Oh yeah.
And so, providing an opportunity for people to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, we have some really good guts to our bike infrastructure. I mean, if we think about it, like I said, I live on the east side. I have two bridges I can get across to go to Seattle. And at one point, I had a project that was right in Pioneer Square. That was an amazing commute. Like, boop, straight across, Dearborn, there. It was for a while I was at the University of Washington, and the commute was pretty good, pretty good. So we have a lot of good pieces, but we just have so many disjointed pieces. And like I said, I know it's across the state. Obviously, we're one of the bigger urban areas, but there's a lot of little urban areas that could probably use a little bit of work too. So it's
Hmm.
just, you just keep poking at it and keep trying to change it.
What are some of your personal fitness and cycling goals that you have? Or do you have any adventures planned? Or what's the future like for you?
Well, I have a few adventures. So I'm going to do the Cascade Walla Walla tour, which is always a fun one. I think it goes back to the wine thing I mentioned. I am going to do the Cascade's also introducing the Iron Horse gravel ride this year. So I'm not a dirt rider, but I got my husband a gravel bike, and a friend is one of the sponsors, so I'm going to do it. I am actually going to miss the women's ride here because I'll be in Wisconsin doing one of the competitions I focus on every year. Yeah, so that's kind of those are my bike adventures. I just came back from California riding with some friends, the ones that I met through doing that clinic that I still go down every year and we ride bikes for 5 or 6 days in the sun. Uh,
Nice.
yeah, so, I'm always looking.
Gina, thank you so much. This was so fun, and it's great to get the view that you have of cycling, kind of your personal experience of it, and then as a board member, and just taking the time to share with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for making the time. I've enjoyed it.
Good, good. Well, we'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye now. Throughout the interview, I referred to the upcoming ride as the Revel Ride. However, it's actually called the Revel Revolution Ride. I regret getting that wrong because I think Revel Revolution is a much better representation of the energy that will be present during the event. I found it interesting that Gina didn't really see Cascade Bicycle Club as having a role nationally. She pointed to the American League of Bicyclists for that. And while I believe that the league can play a very valuable role nationally, I also think Cascade Bicycle Club can be a model of what local community engagement and local activism can look like. I would recommend that anybody who wants to inspire a local community of cyclists should go to cascade.org, where you can subscribe and follow what they are working on. I'm having a tough time already trying to figure out how to fit all the biking in that I want to do this summer. There are so many fun things to do. I hope you are finding all kinds of fun activities and also some things that will challenge you. And remember, age is just a gear change.